Hey, how you doing? I'm in the new Hyundai Ioniq 5, and yes, this is how we pronounce the brand in the United States. I'm going to take a different angle on this because I'm probably the last person in media to get my hands on this car. And from what I've seen, there's really two different camps that look at this. You have the traditionalists that like Accords, Camrys, or VW Golfs, and they look at this and they're like, I can't tolerate looking at it. It's just so awkward and weird and different. And as a counterpoint, you have those that are looking for that modern, like, feeling car, that futuristic looking vehicle, that next generation car, and you're just infatuated with it. But if you're somebody that hates the look of this thing, just hang in there because I'm going to try to explain to you why what they're doing here is pretty special. Now, before I talk about the interior and exterior of this car, I need to talk about some of my history with this brand, and I'm going to be as transparent as possible because I think that's what people really want. Now, when I went on press trips for this company, and I drove things like the new Elantra, the new Kia Soul that had a dedicated EV, and I drove both generation EVs, and then they launched the Ioniq EV and the plug-in hybrids, and of course the Kona. There was just something about these products that rubbed me the wrong way. As much as I like them, it seemed like they weren't all that serious about making them. The availability was poor, and on top of that, some of the reps that I talked to, which are no longer in the company, essentially told me they're there for compliance and regulation reasons. They weren't available in all 50 states. They were only available in a handful of states, and even getting them there was difficult. So it was just like they were afterthought products. First generation beta products, and I think to test some things out. And the worst part was they weren't dedicated EVs. They were just taking internal combustion cars that had gasoline engines and then just trying to pack a battery pack into it and an electric motor. And there were so many compromises to that. And you can see it just looking back at those, they haven't aged all that well. Now, coming to this car, and this is the first thing I asked my Kia rep with the EV6 and of course with the Ioniq, please tell me that the mentality is different. And from what they're telling me, yes, this is now a dedicated platform that is a 50-state vehicle. If you're in the United States, you can buy it in almost every state. Now, currently, it's not available in all states, and availability is extremely low, as is most cars. So I think the plan is to really roll this out full scale, but they are definitely limited by their production capacity, and this is something that Hyundai's had a problem with for quite a while. The demand outstrips some of the supply of their products, and they don't have the production capacity to expand out much more than they have. So where does that leave the Ioniq 5? Well, the Ioniq 5, from front to back, and without getting into every detail of this car, when you look at it, if you don't know anything or you're kind of turned off by this brand, you just spend 20-30 minutes looking at the attention to detail. This is something I haven't seen, and clearly this company is trying to set this up as like that showpiece, saying, look, we are 100% serious to electric cars. We are 100% doing this, and we are spending billions of dollars to make it. From headlight and tail light and LED design to panel design and texture and sheet metal stamping, the way that the exterior looks cohesive and not just random geometries thrown everywhere. And when you look at the build quality, and this is something that I harped on with Tesla, Tesla obviously has a huge leg up in terms of software design and all the things that go along with that. They've basically reinvented the car industry with all the software engineering and hardware that they've built. But they were not a manufacturing company to start. And this is where Hyundai is got so much power in the industry in terms of robotics. They are one of the leading robotic and manufacturers in the world. And what you see here in terms of material choice, build quality, fit and finish, the way everything's screwed together, the way things don't look like they're parts bin or like 10-cent pieces everywhere. And that's the biggest wow factor that you have. Obviously, you have to like this style to be into it. But the exterior is definitely something new and fresh and amazing compared to some of the other products that they're doing right now. The interior space is basically an evolution of being able to rescale the entire body of the car. When you get rid of things like exhaust pipes, transmission tunnels, and you have a flat floor all the way across the car with essentially two subframes, front and rear, and electric motors in the front and the back that are really low to the ground, you are able to stretch the cabin. And by moving the wheelbase is much longer on this car. That means you have more interior room to work with, more design flexibility. So you're not locked in to like a lot of what the internal combustion cars are trapped into. So that's why this feels so different. It feels so airy. They have more manufacturing flexibility. So the interior designers and the designers are free to do more with more space. So let's get into the individual components. They have this threaded screen, which is obviously borrowed from some of the more premium brands. The difference here is most of it is functional and usable. The dual screens, you know, you could argue how it looks in terms of being cheap. Yes, this has a giant white bezel around the whole thing, which almost makes it look like a children's toy or a children's tablet that is ruggedized. And there's a waft of like generic cheapness here, but Hyundai and Kia's software, their infotainment team, is really good at making things very functional. They're very strong. While they might not have the huge screens and all the gimmicky features, most of their technology has always worked well, including the safety suite. Now, they have made some changes to like aesthetics, and of course, you can argue if it's functional or not depending on what your usage case is, but just subtle use of ambient lighting, subtle use of soft textures. Now there's other things they've done here, like getting rid of the Hyundai badge on the steering wheel. This offered them a unique opportunity to kind of work with branding. So they've kind of put these 4 dots here, which are reminiscent of many menu systems in smartphones. The layout of everything is very clean and simple. The physical controls that are here, for example, like the lighting stalk and the way that you turn the shifter from drive, park, and reverse, feels very, very high quality. This is a weight of and metallic texture and feel of something you'd find in a $100,000 car. Now, granted, this is not all over the place, but these primary input points are like, let's make it feel special. And that's some of the attention to detail here that makes this a very different, unique vehicle. Now, in terms of usability, they tried to go with this more bench seat approach. That's what it feels like, an older bench, but you have a center console here, which, you know, is a mixed bag. You have your cup holders like right here, your wireless charger's lower, which is probably a good place because it's out of reach. But then you did something with this lower console here that reminds me of like the iMev, the Mitsubishi iMev, where it's like this awkward place to put something you can't reach or get to and you struggle to get to it. But again, you know, every car has this mixed bag of design and elements like this that are, some things are functional, other things are not. The center stack area, if you can call it that, is kind of this floating dashboard design, and they've moved mostly to capacitive touch buttons for the HVAC and then relegated most of the other functions to the touch screen. There are physical buttons here for many of the functions like tuning, volume, and then of course your hard buttons for media and all that. So that's good, and you also have a shortcut button here. It's essentially what you see on every other Hyundai product. It's just cleaned up. I'm not a huge fan of the capacitive interface. I know why they did it, because it looks more modern, but functionality-wise, it's actually worse. Now, you can get this interior in black, and of course, this is this white, and depending on the trim level, it greatly varies how it looks, but this is the limited trim, so you're getting every single option here. Now, like I talked about before, with the entire EV design, you have a different interior feel, and the closest competitors to this, in my opinion, is the ID4 VW and, of course, the MachE, and they share similar traits with different approaches. To me, this is a much more cohesive cabin than the ID4, which is its closest competitor. It really makes that car irrelevant in a lot of cases, just in terms of pure functionality. This feels like a real car that's not just a bunch of gimmicks to say, hey, I'm an EV, and I sacrifice all the usability. Mostly the interior works. The thing is, like, what about comfort and all the other stuff? So the driver's seat feels pretty good. You can push it back really far, and that's kind of the point. This is like one of their features, like you can lay the seat back all the way and you have this ottoman thing. And this is good if you're stuck somewhere like on a level 2 charger where you have to sit there for hours on end. You can actually sit down and chill out. The cabin is very comfortable that way. The negative part about the driver's seat is it just, to me, if I was any taller, this seat does not go down far enough, honestly. I feel like it's very high up for me, and if you're taller, this might be a consideration. But comfort's good overall. The back seat space is very roomy as well. Of course, with the flat floor in the back, it does free up a lot of space. They call this an SUV in marketing. It's not an SUV. I mean, it just basically feels like a large hatchback. The storage space in the back with the seats up, obviously, it's compromised because of the sloping rear roof. It's almost like that SUV coupe thing that's been popularized. So because they angle it off instead of box it off for style and aerodynamics, you lose a lot of the rear storage with the hatch down. So you have to put the seats down if you have a lot of stuff. But really, most everything else in here is very Hyundai and Kia. The way that they've added certain things like this enormous moonroof, but they've added a great shade. It's really quiet in here. The audio system is surprisingly decent for a Bose. It's super flat, so you have to mess with the EQ. But the good thing that they do here, compared to like some of the Teslas, is this is not a reverberation room. There's not this echo effect depending on where you're sitting, because the way that they've shaped the glass and the materials that they use have done a good job at absorbing all of that noise that comes in here. So it feels like a much quieter car for that. But let's get in the shop. I'm going to talk about the battery pack stuff and the electric motors. Now it's time to talk about how this thing's screwed together. Now, a lot of EV people get really geeky, so I'm going to boil this down to some of the bare essentials so you understand what they did here. This car is Hyundai and Kia's first global platform for a dedicated electric car, which means it was not designed from the start to fit any type of gasoline engines or internal combustion engines. Purely EV, which means the entire center plane of the car is a giant battery pack. And because this is a rear-wheel drive architecture first, that means the rear wheels are driven by a primary electric motor. All the power is typically in the back. So if you opt for all-wheel drive, they put a smaller electric motor in the front. And this is all controlled electronically. There's no physical connection between the front and the back of this system. The benefit of doing it this way is packaging, with all the battery on the lowest part of the car and the electric motor stuffed as low as possible. That center of gravity is very low, and it changes the entire way they design the car, which I talked about on the interior space. The other thing is they can design this to have much better weight balance, like split the weight, control the body weight, and the way that they place things and put different things, because you don't have exhaust pipes, you don't have a drive shaft, you don't have a bunch of coolant lines running to and fro, and all the intercoolers and all the things that you get with these bigger turbocharged engines. So it does clean up a lot, but battery packs are very, very heavy. So that's the trade-off. Some people are like, well, you know, EVs are way better, but they still, the bigger the batteries, the heavier they get. So you have to still have suspension. You have to have bigger brake packages. So there's still a lot of mechanical engineering. There's still the traditional systems in an electric car that you get in an internal combustion car with brake fluid and all of the things that need to be done still. Bushings are going to wear out. Sway bar end links are going to break. You're going to burn through brakes and tires probably quicker depending on how you drive. Bigger wheels and tire packages, stickier tires. So all those consumables are still there. So there, again, keeping in mind, there are trade-offs still of having an electric car. These things, you know, cars are wasteful in a lot of cases. So what's the big thing with this? Well, when you spend over $1 billion on an electric car platform, you got to make sure that it's going to scale across the globe, because they need to make as many cars as possible, not just one. They need to make a small car, a medium-sized car, a small CUV, an SUV, scale it out as much as possible, and be able to sell it in multiple markets. In a more rich country where you have more money, you can have the biggest battery pack, the most horsepower, all-wheel drive, and all the features, and you can command a higher price tag, like in the United States at 55 Gs. But in developing markets, maybe you don't want all-wheel drive. Maybe you want a smaller battery pack. Maybe you want to make it more affordable. So they've built this around that concept of how do we make this available to everyone? So on the smaller end right now, there's 3 or 4 battery packs that are available. One that is a 58 kilowatt hour battery pack with 288 cells, all the way up to about 77 kilowatt hour battery with 350 plus cells. And obviously the more cells, the more battery density, the longer the range, and the more potential for power. Now, you can opt for an all-wheel drive system. In the United States, that option's about 4Gs, or pushing 4Gs to get all-wheel drive. And it also hurts the range. So if you get a rear-wheel drive car, you get 302 miles of range. If you get the all-wheel drive model, it drops it down to about 256. And these numbers are not 100% true because it depends on temperature, climate, how much you use your air conditioning unit, accessories, if it's too hot, if it's too cold, the state of charge. I mean, there's so many variables, and that's one of the big things about this car, or cars like this, in terms of EVs now. You have to deal with all the software design that goes into these, and you have some of the issues with software that goes along with it. So let's talk about battery charging times, because this is a big thing in terms of marketing. They claim that you can charge this from 10 to 80% in 18 minutes on an 800 volt charger, which is not readily available to 90% of the United States. And that's true, it will do 10 to 80% in ideal conditions. If you are in an area that has a 400 volt charger, you can still charge around like 30 minutes with that 10 to 80%, but most people only have access to that level 2 charger, that 240 volt, which means, you know, you're gonna be in that 6-hour range from 10 to 100%. The big thing here is the concept of fast charging quickly. Like if you're on the highway and you had a 400 or an 800 volt charger, you could basically get 60 to 70 miles of range in 5 minutes. So that's one of the benefits of this fast charging technology. Now, in terms of battery cells, they're lithium polymer, and LG used to be the battery supplier, and then they got a whole bunch of drama with cells or battery pack fires from fast charging, and LG's blaming Hyundai, Hyundai's blaming LG. So now they're using SK cells, and the cells are purchased from SK, but then manufactured by Mobis or Hyundai. So Hyundai has the internal quality control of the packs going forward. They can fit 4 rows, so a stack of 4 rows of batteries throughout with varying densities. The front and the rear part of this car have steel subframes and strut up front, multi-link in the rear. And of course, you can see how much space is in here to play around with different suspension configurations. My guess is probably when they go to the upper trim levels, like a Genesis EV, they could probably fit double wishbone in the front based on making some minor changes or some moderate changes. There's enough room to work in different things. The back has aluminum in it in terms of knuckles and some suspension components. The front is aluminum knuckles, but everything else is mostly steel for the carriers. Last thing to talk about is power. Since I said this is a rear-wheel drive architecture, the motor in the back is always going to be bigger at 168 kilowatts, and most people have no idea what that is. So let me just tell you in horsepower. It's 225 horsepower and 258 pounds of torque in the back. If you go to the all-wheel drive setup, it moves to a 165 74 kilowatts, so 165 motor, and 74 kilowatt in the front, which means 320 horsepower and 446 pounds of torque. And that is all electronically controlled. There's no physical connection between front and back, mind you. So everything is software designed. How it develops power, how consistent power is, how that torque delivery is, and it's always adjusting based on conditions, based on temperature, based on terrain with stability management. So these numbers are, best case, but are you going to get them all the time? And that's something we're going to have to look at during the drive. The Ioniq, we're in sport mode and traction stability off. Yeah, this thing's hauling ass. And, so this is kind of the discussion with the car in terms of performance and the way that it feels to drive. And we're in and out of all these last generation internal combustion 4 cylinders now, and it's like a broken record. There's no 1.6 liter, 2 liter turbo, nothing that they're making that could do what this does. And you can make the argument, yeah, this isn't as proven, this is going to be old technology, but I'm telling you right now, this is, once you get out behind the wheel of this compared to some of the other eco platforms with a traditional internal combustion engine, there's no going back. For a normal daily driving car, this is so much better in every single category, from power delivery, torque, to initial performance, to usable performance, and of course, it's quiet. There's no rattly ass stuff. There's no CVT drone. There's no transmission that you have to program. The only thing here is the ability for the car to communicate like a regular car, which this is very different. You have electric motor in the front, you have electric motor in the back, and it's all electronic programming. So it depends on the drivetrain engineers and the electronic engineers to make this cohesive to drive. So the main thing is, yes, it's fast. The dual motor makes a lot of sense. It's way quicker. It has that instant thrust you expect from an electric car. It's more power than anybody needs on a daily commute. So I'm gonna go over kind of the different modes. You have 4 regen modes, which means when you take your foot off the accelerator, it starts to slow you down with regenerative braking. And as you go up the levels, the more aggressive it gets. So by the time you're at level 3, you take your foot off the gas, the car's like, using both front and rear to regenerate power to the battery pack. And it gets a little disconcerting for passengers because it's like that herky-jerky first-time driver feeling where your head's bobbing back and forth, and it makes you a little bit car sick. So, at least you can cater it and customize it, and you can go back to completely normal where there's no regen. Then there's iPedal mode. The interesting part about iPedal mode is that it always has the front motor engaged. So typically, if you're in eco mode, it's just rear drive only, and then it activates the front motor or the front traction when you need it. When you put it in iPedal, that front motor is always engaged. The other thing that makes the front motor always engaged is when you go into sport mode and you go into traction stability off. So if I turn traction and stability off, it engages the front motor. It's like a 50-50 lock. Every single layer of different drive modes and stability and iPedal mode and all that, they're all electronically tuned, and you feel that. You feel different layers of it: throttle sensitivity, stability control levels. And right now, traction and stability is off, mostly because I found that when you leave it on, this car is hyper overreactive, much like all the other Hyundais and Kias. If you're driving with stability on, as soon as you get any traction loss or any turning and accelerating, it's like cutting the power. And it just feels completely safe, but it feels very, very unnatural. So if you're somebody that really likes to drive, you're gonna have to turn all the stability and traction off. In terms of other areas of performance, this rides, to me, it's better handling than the ID4. The ID4 is really, really soft. There's more of a disconnect from the front and the back of that car, where this feels way more solid, way more connected in terms of driving, and the front and the back don't feel as disconnected, namely in turning, and it's partly because the suspension is a little bit firmer than the ID4, and it's not in a bad way. This thing rides great over all pavement. It's super quiet. It feels more like a luxury car, and I can only imagine when they get this platform used in a Genesis how refined it's going to be. But this is an amazing driving experience. Compared to the lower end MachE, the same thing holds true. This feels like a way more connected drive. It's less floaty, less disconnected. So in terms of what's the best lower level EV, I would say this is my favorite one I've driven so far, and I think a lot of people are really going to appreciate the way that they've made this feel like a real car with the specialness of that futuristic style, and then all the electronics seem to work pretty well. But I'm going to do more testing on this in the future as I get maybe a rear-wheel drive only version and, of course, the EV6. So let's head into the final thoughts. Final thoughts on the Hyundai Ioniq5. Now, I just went back and recently watched some of my previous electric car videos, and even going back to 2015 when I did the Kia Soul EV, that was the best-in-class range for the price at the time at 90 miles. Now, granted, that's been pushing 6-7 years at this point, but it just goes to show you nobody in their right mind would go back and buy that car unless you need it as a golf cart or a runaround for a grocery store parking lot. And that makes me wonder about this generation EV. Now, this is way different. This is definitely a quantum leap in terms of engineering and design, and it shows on every aspect of this car, from interior to exterior. This is a car that you would buy, or lease. I would probably lease it if you could over buying it at this point and see how it goes for the next 3 years. Because if you have all-wheel drive, you're getting a 250-mile range. If you're getting rear-wheel drive, which in good climates, that's perfectly fine. That 300-mile range, if you have chargers around you, is completely ample to do 99% of your stuff aside from road trips. And, you know, that's just more of a United States problem, really, with infrastructure. So the good is it's super refined. It drives great. It's quiet. It's not too soft like the ID4. The handling is pretty good. And it feels well built. It doesn't feel like they shortcut every single corner of the car to get it out. So things feel screwed together. There's a level of solidness in certain parts. The assemblies feel good. The plastics don't feel cheap. The outside looks pretty good. The LED lighting looks really unique and novel. The negative part is some of the interior design, the ergonomics, going to touch for a lot of things, removing physical controls. Like, I struggled to see why this seat heater menu versus the climate control are separated. The gauge cluster, the instrument panel right in front of you, the screen's too big, so if you sit close to the steering wheel, the top right corners of the screen are cut off by the steering wheel where your hands are, which is where your charge information and your speedometer is. So it's little things like this that, you know, they're annoying, but the car is still great. Really, that's where I'm gonna leave it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next video.